Hi, so I'm in a parking garage to get out of the wind because it's been really windy lately. And so I'm not sure if we're going to have any disturbances, but as far as audio disturbances, that should be hopefully minimal. So right now we're looking at Robert Sokolowski's Introduction to Phenomenology. I'm having you read pages 8 through 16, and then skipping to 22 and 41. Okay. So then, what is phenomenology? The father of phenomenology is a philosopher by the name of Edmund Husserl. He was born in 1859 and died in 1938. He wrote Logical Investigations in 1900, 1901, and in that book is where phenomenology is explicated in full detail. And so when we think of phenomenology, we also could recognize some famous existentialist philosophers as well, Martin Heidegger, Jean-Paul Sartre, Gabriel Marcel, and also Maurice Merleau-Ponty from in the 20th century. And so phenomenology is really the study of appearances by way of being by way of being conscious of something. So in other words, phenomenology has to do with the Greek words phenomenon and logos, so an account of the various ways in which phenomena appear to us as it's experienced in the first person. So the emphasis there is on the first person experience, hence why it was so important for the existentialist movement, because the existentialists focus so much on the first person account of experience as well, right? And then so phenomenology has to do with the way things, ideas, thoughts, and people appear to us as having the most utmost importance. And so that idea of appearance is also having to do with experience as well. And so we have the main subcategories or structures of how phenomenology is understood by way of Edmund Husserl. One is presence and absence. So in other words, there is a way of working whereby things are present and likewise they are absent. Identity in a manifold, manifolds of appearance bring about identities, and then also parts and wholes, whereby parts are understood within the context of the wholes. And so with presence and absences, absence make no sense except as a played off against the presences that can be achieved through them. So that's a point that Sokolowski makes, that Husserl was actually the first, he was the one that innovated the concept of presence and absence. And so that's a unique contribution whereby with identity in a manifold and parts and wholes actually can be traced back all the way to Aristotle as well. And then also looking at different ways in which identity is understood by way of a manifold. You could think of thinkers such as John Locke in terms of ideas of selfhood, etc. But presence and absence really is Edmund Husserl's contribution. So starting with the chapter, what is intentionality and why is it important? We have the word intentionality, which is to be conscious of something. And so conscious of something and experience of something. So in other words, every intending has its intended object. And so what that really means is that consciousness, as we understand it, really is consciousness of something. So we're not, in order to understand what consciousness is, we also need to understand that we need to take into consideration what consciousness is, how it is that consciousness is of something. So, in other words, it's not just consciousness in and of itself. So when we're thinking of consciousness, we're thinking about how, when we think about particular things, and people, ideas, etc., we also are then understanding what consciousness is. So in other words, we can't understand consciousness without understanding what consciousness is. So in other words, how consciousness is conscious of things. Excuse me. So then it's not to be confused with intention as it's commonly understood as the purpose we have in mind when we set out to do something. So intentionality has to do with that importance of how it is that we are conscious of things, and thereby showing us the purpose we have in mind when we set out to do something is too limiting. Okay, so intentionality, it more has to do with how it is that we are conscious of things, how things appear to us by way of experience. That's the best way of understanding what intentionality is. Okay, and then so intentionality is the conscious relationship we have to an object, how it appears to us, the phenomena that appears to us is how consciousness is understood by way of being conscious of things within experience. Okay? And then so Sokolowski also has the subchapter of the egocentric predicament, whereby we're thinking that we're disputing this idea that consciousness is a bubble in an enclosed cabinet, whereby impressions and concepts occur in this enclosed space, in this enclosed space of thinking. So we get to things by way of our impression of reasoning we have with perception. So in other words, it's not this idea that we get to things by way of our impression of reasoning through perception exclusively. So maybe we need to think about this in terms of this idea whereby all we can be sure of is our own consciousness. So as neutrally separate from the world of experience. So all thought happens in my head is something that phenomenology or a phenomenologist is going to get us to try to pull out of that dualism of mind and body, or mind and experience. So then Sokolowski writes, quote, if we are bereft of intentionality, if we don't have a world in common, then we do not enter into a life of reason, evidence, and truth, unquote. So then we move to the subchapter, the publicness of mind. So here we have a phenomenologist shows us that the mind is a public thing. So the way in which we understand our consciousness is out in the open. It's not just happening within the confines of our head. So in other words, we extend ourselves out by the ways in which we're conscious of things and the way that we are experiencing the world. Okay, so then Sokolowski writes, quote, the mind and the world are correlated with one another. Are correlated with one another, unquote. So reasoning and perception are bound together, and also and most importantly, subjectivity and objectivity. So here we're not just thinking, so when we say something like phenomenology is, a phenomenologist pays close attention to a first-person account of experience, don't misinterpret that to be just about subjective experience, because our subjective understanding is understood by how it is that we understand objective reality as well. So subjectivity and objectivity are working hand in hand for the phenomenologist. So we're looking at how those two are bound together, right? So we have a variety of intentional structures, not just judgments or propositions. Things do not just exist. So their being is expressions of how they appear. Mistakes are and camouflage are real in the way they appear. So in other words, all we're looking at is how things appear to consciousness in order to understand experience and likewise consciousness. And also the things in which we are conscious of. So we're really looking at the how of consciousness and how it is that we are how we are conscious of things exposes also how it is that we think, how we have knowledge, how we have experience phenomenologically. Okay? So I think I'm going to end it there, and then I'm going to take up the next video on the 3 formal structures of phenomenology. Okay? So thanks.